Thinking Tactically is a paid program. The information provided is not legal advice and should not be used in lieu of legal counsel. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of West Coast Armory North or this station.
Every day, we hear stories of innocent people who are the victims of violent crimes. Do you want to leave your personal defense up to someone else? Or take the initiative and be responsible and prepared to defend yourself and your family? If you answered yes, this is the show for you. Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. And now, here are your hosts, John Holshin and Kevin Smith.
Good morning and welcome to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. I'm Kevin Smith.
And this is John Holshin.
All right, John, so we're going to start off again today with some lessons from the news. So what do we got this week?
First story comes out of Jackson, Mississippi. An escaped convict breaks into a home, corrals a family, husband, wife, and daughter. And to start with, there's a little bit of struggle between the man of the house and this convict. He ends up getting stabbed in the shoulder, gets control of him at that point. A little while later, the wife convinces the convict that she needs to leave the room to go to the bathroom. And actually what she does is acquire the handgun that's in the home for self-defense. She comes back and ends up shooting the guy, freeing her husband. The fight goes on. Even though the guy's been wounded, he's not out of it. The husband takes the guns, ends up shooting him again, which subsequently kills him. He had been jailed originally on suspicion of murder. He'd been on the run for over a week at this point. So, who knows what he would have done had they not had a firearm available to him.
Well, and obviously the criminal was already willing to stab the father, the husband in the home, so obviously violence was not a concern for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Second one's a 25-year-old burglar shot while attempting to break into a suburban Austin, Texas home. He drove right up, talk about brazen. He drove right up, parked in the driveway, goes to the front door. The front door is locked. He goes around, finds the garage is open. He gets access from the garage into the kitchen. However, that gave time for the woman who was home to arm herself. She points a weapon at him, orders him to leave. When he doesn't, in fact, he advances toward her in a threatening fashion. She ends up shooting him, and he survives that wound. But again, he's willing to advance on an armed woman that is telling him to get out of her home. Who knows where it would have gone had she not had that physical means to defend herself.
Well, yeah, that's just going with the idea that he's obviously thinking, oh, it's a woman with a firearm. She's not going to do anything. I'm going to be able to overpower her. And clearly she did what she needed to.
Absolutely, she did. Third one is a little different here, and this one gives us a little bit more, concern. This also happens to happen in Texas. 28-year-old man, former Marine, combat veteran, eating lunch, 12:30 in the afternoon. He sees some suspicious activity, and actually, what he sees is a couple guys get out of the car, put bandanas over their faces, arm themselves, and go into an electronics/game store. The one guy comes back out a couple minutes later carrying a bunch of game consoles, puts them in the vehicle. At that point, the veteran goes to his car, gets his handgun out of the car, and he's within hailing distance of these guys. When the second armed robber comes out with a gun in his hand, the veteran verbally challenges them. At which point the robbers point guns at him, and he responds. He fires. The article's not clear who fired how many times. However, there were 10 rounds fired during this gunfight, and one of the robbers was struck fatally. He manages to get into his vehicle, but dies there in the vehicle. The other one it takes off and was only slightly wounded. In the end here, yes, there was a robbery prevented. Yes, there was a bad guy that we might say, got his just reward. But some of the things that concern me, 10 rounds fired, and in the article it mentions that some of the buildings in the shopping center were hit by stray rounds. Had that, and at this point, officials are going to present the case to a grand jury. They're recommending that no charges be filed. And frankly, definitely since it's Texas, my experience in Texas indicates to me that, yeah, it's very unlikely that there will be any charges filed against this veteran. He did act within the letter of the law. My concern would be those stray rounds were by definition stray. They hit other businesses. If they penetrate through that wall or through that window and strike somebody inside, whoever launched them had absolutely no control of those rounds. So had someone else been hit, then this case would have got a little harder look. And although technically under the law, the person committing the crime has some legal responsibility, there's also civil responsibility and just the moral responsibility. If trying to prevent a robbery, you end up crippling someone, paralyzing them for life, or shooting them to death, how are you going to feel about that? How are the courts going to feel about that, both criminal and civil? A lot of things to think about.
Well, and even with that, you still got to question, why was he not notifying law enforcement immediately when he saw that start, when he saw the people coming out with the bandanas? And you got to question, why is he choosing to be the the enforcement at that point instead of trying to get the proper authorities there?
Well, I did leave out, he did instruct a bystander to call 911, so it wasn't an either or,
okay.
But still, to the focus of your statement, he has chosen at this point to function basically in a law enforcement capacity, and he's not a law enforcement officer. Is it morally just? Well, we all would like to think that bad people should get their just rewards, as I say. But at the same time, we take on a lot of liability when we make ourselves, when we deputize ourselves, so to speak, and give ourselves that task.
Well, and it goes back to the idea of, is property worth a life? And worth risking your life, risking another's for property? Because at that point, they're not shooting at the clerk inside that you're protecting somebody. You're confronting them, or he was confronting them because they had stolen property.
Exactly. And it's, that's my recommendation remains. I don't intend to discharge a firearm unless my life or somebody else's life is in danger. That's my personal choice. And stories like this just point out that, give us that example that even though evidently this guy was competent enough to get hits on both of these bad guys, nowhere in the story does it talk about the bad guys shooting at all. So I really wonder how many of these about 10 rounds that were fired. Also, considering that they're talking about other buildings in the shopping center being hit, the armed citizen was at his vehicle. So it seems likely it was his gunfire that hit the other buildings rather than the bad guy's gunfire. Don't know for sure, but just, again, a big caution there. As we think about going armed in public, we want to consider these possibilities. If different things happen, what will our actions be? Make sure that we think about it in advance when we have time to think about it and consider the ramifications, so that in the heat of the moment, we don't choose a course of action that we might have chosen differently had we had a little more time to think about it.
All right, sounds good. All right, remember, if you have any questions for us or anything you'd like to hear about on the show, email us at thinkingtactically@gmail.com. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we're going to be talking about communication with regards to personal security and how we're communicating. So stay with us. You're listening to Thinking Tactically right here on Fox Sports 1380.
You're listening to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. Brought to you in part by West Coast Armory North, providing expert personalized service to each individual client. For more information, log on to westcoastarmorynorth.com. Insights Training Center is locally owned and nationally recognized and offers the most complete self-defense, firearms, and tactical training available to civilians and private organizations, law enforcement, and military. In business for over 20 years, they've taught more than 20,000 private citizens, law enforcement officers, instructors, SWAT teams, corrections personnel, security officers, and military personnel, offering classes from basic self-defense and handgun safety to advanced tactic classes and everything in between. Insights Training Center has a course for you. Their professional instructors come from highly specialized and thorough backgrounds in law enforcement, military special operations, and the private sector. Visit insightstraining.com for a complete list of upcoming classes.
Every day, there are men and women of our armed forces dealing with illness and injuries, and their families are unable to be by their side. Fisher House works to get the families of injured military members to their soldiers during these difficult times. They provide housing and transportation to help make certain our soldiers are not alone. Visit fisherhouse.org to see how you can make a difference in the lives of the brave men and women of our armed forces that have sacrificed so much for us. Those of us at Thinking Tactically and West Coast Armory North are proud to support Fisher House.
Taking responsibility out of someone else's hands and putting it into yours. This is Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. And now, back to more of the show. Here are your hosts, John Holshin and Kevin Smith.
All right, welcome back. You're listening to Thinking Tactically right here on Fox Sports 1380. So, John, we're going to be talking about communication for personal security, and I know there's a lot of different areas of that you want to hit on today.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, we tend to think, again, it's easier to think about hardware. It's even easier to think about physical skills that we can test. Can you hit the center of the target every time, or, how close to the center of the target every time? When we get into tactics and kind of the software end of it, how do we think, how do we interact with people and that sort of thing, it's a little harder to get a hold of it, but it's really valuable, really worth thinking about. So communication for personal security, where my mind starts with this, is a number of years ago now, there was a study that was done where some researchers took videos of people walking down the street. These videos were like 10 seconds, or edited to be about 10 seconds, of them walking up to a corner and then crossing the street. They took the videos into the federal prison system, and they showed these videos to violent offenders, rapists, murderers, that type of criminal, and said, all right, I'm going to show you these 5 people. Tell me of the 5 people if anybody stands out as somebody you think would be a good victim. If anybody stands out as somebody you really wouldn't want to mess with. And what they found was that the bad guys were, depending upon, this was actually done a number of times, they were well over 90%, typically 94 to 97% consistent as who they chose as the best victim and who they chose as the least likely victim candidate.
Okay.
So, right, wrong, or indifferent, that consistency says there's something there we can maybe work with. I want to be the guy that is chosen last every time.
Yep.
It's that simple.
That's not a race you want to win.
That's
or a contest
exactly
you want to win.
it. Yeah, we look at it as an interview. It's an interview process. And this is an interview we want to fail. Professional criminals frequently conduct some form of interview process where they size up prospective victims. It might be they simply watch people walking down the street, decide who to follow for a little bit, and see do they have that opportunity to mug them or rob them. Even some of the activities a number of years ago now in the Seattle area, there were a series of armed robberies in the downtown area around the Pike Place Market. Didn't get a lot of publicity, but it was going on. And it appeared, again, that they were watching people over a period of time. Obviously, they're looking for people that seem to have a lot of cash or valuable jewelry, that sort of thing. So a good a return on investment, shall we say, from the bad guys. Yeah, exactly. Not me either. But they're also, they're not stupid. They're not looking for a fight. They're looking for a victim. So that's an interview I want to fail. So let's analyze that, is where we go with it, and see if we can figure out how do we fail that interview.
Okay.
So the next step with that study that was done in the prisons, it was real easy to get numbers as to, how many pick this person or that person first or last. Getting to understand how the bad guy thinks about it, that's a little more difficult, because many of these people, the criminals that were incarcerated, they're not necessarily, shall we say, in touch with all of the processes and able to articulate all of their reasoning. But it comes down to two comments were heard over and over again. The first one has to do with what I call awareness. The bad guy would make a comment like, he or she knows what's going on. You're not going to get anything over on that person. Or, yeah, that person's got their head in the clouds or head somewhere else a little more colorful. Or comments such as, I could walk up to that one and they'd never even see me coming. I could get a hold of her and she wouldn't even know what happened. Those kind of comments. And that was by far the most common reason that the bad guy brought up first when asked, why this one and not that one?
Okay, so it came down to, was the person paying attention? Were they kind of just in their smartphone? Are they just ignoring the world around them? That sort of thing.
Exactly, awareness. So if we look at that, the next concept we want to understand is how powerful body language is. Again, depending upon who you study and, which studies you look at, what all the studies agree upon is only a very relatively small portion of communication takes place in the choice of words. A lot more communication takes place in body language and tone of voice, in posture, in facial expression, that sort of thing. So now remember, these videos that we're talking about there was no sound here. There was no verbal interview. All they saw was somebody walking down the street, 10 seconds worth of them walking down the street. And they made decisions on that 10 seconds as to how aware this person was or wasn't. So our question out there would be to the listeners, think about it for a moment. What do you think somebody sees from across the street, maybe even down the block? What do they see that gives them some information about how aware you are?
Yeah, are you the person that's sitting there not paying attention to anything, almost running into the street, running into other people, or are you the one that's surveying?
Right, what does that look like? So from a distance, one of the first things that gives us information about this is the posture of the body. Is your head up or down, for example? If you're staring at your feet, just think about the silhouette of somebody staring at their feet and walking along looking down. They don't look very aware. The other side of that could be gazing up, the chin slightly lifted, kind of a daydreaming posture, I call it. Contrast that with someone who's standing erect, their head is up, and probably moving from side to side, probably scanning. So right off from a distance, even in maybe across a ball field at dusk, you can tell that this person, just by the way they're standing and moving their head, appears to be aware or appears not to be aware. So boom, that's the first what we call target indicator. The bad guy now hones in on that person and says, let me take another closer look at that one, because I think I could sneak up on that one, or I could just stand there and let them walk up to me, and they'll never even see me coming.
Okay.
So awareness first in body language. Head up and moving is an indicator that we're aware. The second thing that they typically talked about is what I call willingness. And this was comments about, that one's a pushover. That one is, I could do anything I want, and, they're not going to put up any kind of struggle at all. Because, again, they're not looking for a fight. They're looking for a score. They're looking for a payoff. Now, interestingly enough, I've seen these videos, at least some of them, in a presentation. And some of the people that were chosen last were not physically impressive people. They weren't big, strong, strapping. They didn't necessarily look physically more capable than the average person to defend themselves. In fact, one that is well known and talked about in the researchers is a actually a quite small statured young lady, slightly over 5 foot tall. Doesn't, nothing that you look at her and go, no big muscles, no indicator that this person has particularly any physical skills. She was consistently chosen last. They were remarked on this enough that they took her out and put her into other groups of 5 videos to see how consistent this was. And she was very consistently chosen last. So one of the interviews that I saw was a guy that was a convicted, actually was in prison for rape, but he also had an armed robbery conviction previously, and actually a couple of other robbery convictions previously. And he was asked specifically, why not this person? Why not that particular woman right there? And his comment was, I will never forget. He said, man, if you grab a hold of that, it's going to be kick, bite, scratch, and scream. I don't need none of that.
Well, and but it's showing that she conducted herself in a manner that prevented or allowed people to believe that she was aware, attentive, and was going to be fighting back right away. Exactly.
Comes to that second factor of willingness. So willingness to what? Willingness to defend yourself. Willingness to, you will stand up for your rights. Nobody has the right to physically assault you. Nobody has the right to take your stuff. And the criminals that were interviewed said, they would rather choose someone that's just going to meekly and mildly give them their stuff. Well, all right, so there's something to think about. So when we analyze that from the point of view of communication skills again, we really get into the concept that there's 3 general postures. And those postures are submissive, assertive, and aggressive. A submissive posture attracts unwanted attention from predators. You look like prey. Predators are looking for prey. You attract unwanted attention. An aggressive posture, an aggressive outlook and being attracts unwanted attention in a different situation. You get into what the psychologists call hierarchical conflicts. Right? You get into ego issues.
Yeah, you get that alpha personality thing where somebody doesn't like that this person's getting a little too aggressive with them.
Exactly, a little too uppity or whatever the case may be. Where we want to be is we want to be in the assertive posture for the most part. Assertive is kind of like the I'm okay, you're okay. I'm not looking to push on you, but I'm not going to let you push on me. And yeah, if you're going to come over here and try and do something to me, I'm not going to make it easy for you. So that's where we want to be. So now we need to analyze that a little bit. And we've already kind of talked about the general body posture. If we think about that in terms of submissive, assertive, and aggressive, again, that submissive person tends to be head down. Actually, a lot of this happens with the eyes. It's eye contact. Right? Submissive eye contact. We all know what submissive eye contact would look like. You make contact with someone visually for a moment, and they look down and away. Right? They don't want to make eye contact, so typically their eyes drop, look down, the head drops down, the shoulders roll forward, and that's a submissive posture, very similar to what we see in the animal kingdom. An aggressive posture is holding that eye contact too long. That is not acceptable either. In some cases, particularly in an inner city type environment where people are very concerned about their social status in terms of respect for as it impacts on their victim potential, people aren't going to let them look at them aggressively without calling them on it. Hey, what's your problem? Type of thing. And that typically with eye contact is we held the eye contact too long. Where we want to be is that assertive eye contact. What does that look like? Well, scientists have analyzed this. Now they've got some really great systems with computers and software that can track visual gaze, the camera can look at your face and tell what you're looking at. So what they have discovered is normal eye contact among strangers, if you make eye contact with someone socially that is a stranger that you're not going to continue some interaction with, your eyes kind of slide off laterally. You don't look down. You don't bring your chin up and eyes up. That can be heading toward the aggressive in some cases. But your eyes slide off to the side, off laterally. And your expression may or may not change. If it doesn't change, it indicates a lack of interest in further communication. But it tells them I saw you and I'm not feeling submissive towards you. It's the neutral.
Okay. So it's about keeping that, as we've talked about, just continuing to be scanning your environment anyway, is just continuing to stay lateral, not going up and down with your eyes, not giving off other submissive or aggressive tendencies.
Right. So that kind of, are some ideas of the core concepts, the core things that we're looking at, that we need to be aware of. What signals are we sending? Are we sending the signals that we want to send, or are we, in fact, sending some signals we're not aware of that might make us more prone to some negative interactions of one way or the other? The next thing that we like to explore are some specific situations. The first are people that I call professional victimizers. And you may or may not agree with me, but I include the typical panhandler on the street as a professional victimizer. They're not a violent victimizer, or very, very seldom, but they are making a profession of separating people from their valuables, from their money to start with. Right? They have well-developed for them techniques that they use. You didn't go out today with the plan. It wasn't on your list, along with, go to the grocery store and go to the bank, was not find someone to give $5 to. That wasn't part of the plan today.
It's still not part of my plan today.
Exactly. But when you come in contact with these people, it's part of their plan.
Yeah.
Part of their plan is, hey, can I get a couple bucks from this person or more? So they are in the profession of separating you from your funds. And they've got various techniques to do it, from the signs, from the things they have to say. And I'm less interested in all of that than I'm interested in what can we do about it. Well, if you want to give to these people, it makes you feel good to share where you can, and that's the area you choose to share. That's fine. I would caution you that in some cases, that can open you up to other problems. As a matter of fact, one of my daughters experienced this a number of years, happened to be down in the Pike Place area where my two daughters were there. They separated a little bit. One was looking in one store window while the other one was getting a coffee or a treat or something. And the one thought, I feel sorry for these homeless people. I'm going to give this guy a buck. And as it was reported to me from the other daughter, by the time she got her wallet out of her purse, that was enough body language that all of a sudden there were 2 or 3 homeless people with their hands out. By the time she had the dollar out of the wallet, there were 5. And now she feels more than a little uncomfortable because she's the center of a group of people that all are, hey, you're giving him a buck. How about me? What's wrong with me? So just be aware if you're going to give to those people. If I do donate to charities, I very much enjoy donating to charities, and there are specific charities that we support. I don't do it on the street. I don't do it on the street where I have to get my wallet out and interact with people.
Well, and there's a lot of community charities in the area that do support the homeless and do try to help them with shelter and food, that you don't have to be physically pulling out your wallet on the street to do that.
Right. Another thing I keep in mind, or another reason that I don't recommend that, is mental health professionals that I've talked to that deal with the homeless have pointed out to me that a large percentage of the people in that position suffer from various mental illnesses. Some have gone as far as to say that 30 years ago, a large percentage of those people likely would have been institutionalized in mental institutions. So they are that degree of mentally ill. That means they're unpredictable. It doesn't mean they're necessarily bad people, but it means as a group, a percentage of them are unpredictable. A percentage of them are not interacting with the same reality that we're interacting with. That makes them unpredictable. That unpredictability brings the possibility of physical harm to the people that interact with them.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, I was a few years back, I was out at a bar with some friends. We come outside, and several gentlemen were beating up a homeless guy on the street. And me and a friend of mine, we went and we separated the guys from him, got him to stop, at which point the homeless guy had a knife and pointed it at me and started aggressively towards me. And I had to quickly get away from that situation, but we were trying to help him. We were stopping him. He was already bleeding. He was already, he was being hurt, and we stopped them from hurting him, and he didn't even have a clue of what was going on around him.
Yep, that's a great example. So how do we deal with those folks? My number one priority is keep moving. If at all possible, keep moving. Don't stop to interact with them. As I can move past them, I simply say, no thank you, or sorry, can't help you. Now, sorry, can't help you is actually a little more, in line with what, they're asking me for something. And I just say, sorry, can't help you, and keep moving. The other one, actually saying no thank you, is interesting. That kind of takes them off guard because it's not really the correct response, is it? Right? They're not offering to do something for me. They're asking me something. But my response is no thank you. And I'll use that one more. Maybe I'm downtown and I'm coming up to a red light. I can't cross the street. So I'm going to be stuck with this person for a little bit. So I might start off with put my hands out, no thank you. And you notice what I just said there. You can't see it because we're in the radio medium. But as I say, sorry, can't help you, or no thank you, my hands come up around chest height, palms outward, extending slightly out from my body. Nothing at all threatening, but it's boundary setting. And people instinctively understand this kind of body language. When you put your hands out from your body with your palms open, moving away from your body, that's a stay away from me motion, and people understand that instinctively. In fact, those who don't respond to that, that's a further clue. It's a further bit of information that I use, because it could mean that they do understand normal body language, which the vast majority of people do, but they are purposefully ignoring it to continue to get closer to me. That tells me they're more concerned with their agenda than mine and my personal sense of safety and security. So that means I'm a little more wary of this person. Why are you closing the gap when I'm clearly showing you I don't want you to get any closer to me?
Yeah, and remember, when we're using the example of, say, the homeless on the streets as something that you generally see on a day-to-day basis and that you interact with, but this is meant to as a way of communicating nonverbal communication that you do every day so that it keeps you safe in all interactions.
It's that combination of verbal and nonverbal. So I continue to move, say, sorry, can't help you. Hands go out away from my body, and if I get stuck with them and they continue to move forward, then I either go into the other one, the two phrases, right? I'll say, no, thank you, a little more emphasis in my voice. And that sometimes makes them kind of stop and think, what's going on there? They continue to push their agenda. I make my voice a little sterner and quite simply say, no. I said I can't help you, or simply no. At that point, every once in a while it gets to that point and somebody then goes off mumbling with, you don't have to be so, but for the most part, they just turn around and walk away because they realize they're not going to get what they're looking for. And that's really all we're trying to do, is I want to minimize my interaction with this person in order to maximize my personal security.
Well, and it goes back to we want to lose the interview and not win the victim contest.
Yeah, I do not want to win that sweepstakes of being selected as a victim.
So to summarize, we're looking, there's the three common postures for nonverbal communication of submissive, aggressive, and we're looking to be in the assertive state. We're looking to keep our eyes continuing to move around, watching our surroundings, and not giving off signs of either aggressiveness or submissiveness as part of our personal security self-defense.
You've got it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Thinking Tactically right here on Fox Sports 1380.
You're listening to Thinking Tactically. Personal security for today's world. Brought to you in part by Insights Training Center, offering the most complete self-defense, firearms, and tactical training available to citizens, private organizations, law enforcement, and military. Online at insightstraining.com.
The Northwest Women's Shooting Network is a comprehensive resource in person and online for all women's shooting needs and questions. Everything from basic education to continuing education, we are here to help you find and buy the right gun for you, get the proper skills for personal protection, and to create a welcome and safe environment to learn with other women. Coming from over 30 years of combined experience in the shooting industry, we are mothers, sisters, wives, and just plain awesome gals. In other words, just like you. Our commitment is to help you become an informed, skilled, confident woman. We are based out of West Coast Armory North in Everett, Washington, minutes north of Seattle. We offer a variety of events, seminars, training, and more. Already we have hosted a variety of events such as Kids Safety Day, Ladies Night Out, and shopping events, and we also hold regular women-only classes in addition to our Ladies Shooting Club and Ladies League. At the range, we have over 70 rental firearms for you to try before you buy, and every Thursday is Ladies Day. Find us at westcoastarmorynorth.com under the Women's Network tab and on Facebook at Northwest Women's Shooting Network.
The trauma of war does not end when the guns stop firing. Many servicemen and women who come home from war face life-changing issues. These issues can affect not only them, but their families and friends. If you or someone you know is struggling with PTSD, know you are not alone. Veterans Affairs has resources and information available to help our brave soldiers. Go to ptsd.va.gov to learn how they can help.
Welcome back to the radio show dedicated to information and education about defending yourself. Thinking tactically, personal security for today's world. Once again, here are your hosts, John Holshin and Kevin Smith.
All right, welcome back. You're listening to Thinking Tactically right here on Fox Sports 1380. So, John, some of the questions that we keep getting in are just some basic, like how people are starting to think about their personal security or their self-defense, and they're looking for some tips on how to start. So what would you say are like 3 or 4 tips to begin the personal security, self-defense type of thinking or planning?
That's a great question, and it's there's a lot of facets. But starting with that idea of how can we distill this down? So I would say, let's see here, probably 3. Number 1 is get some professional training, and let me just throw the 3 out there. Number 1 will be get professional training. Number 2 will be purchase the best equipment that you can afford to purchase. Number 3 is realize that you need to actually practice. You need an ongoing skill development and skill maintenance plan. That's both physical skills practice and, at least for a period of time, some study. So practice and study are the third one. So professional training, best equipment, and a plan of practice and study.
Okay, so with the first one being professional training, I know that there's a lot of different training places out there, a lot of different training areas that you can focus on. Where would you say is a good good topic to start with? Is it firearms themselves? Is it handguns, rifles? Is it self-defense as in karate, that sort of thing? Where are some of the things that you would recommend starting with?
Even before the what, I'm going to take a moment and address the why, because this is one of those things that somehow many people don't recognize the value of seeking out this type of training. And what you can learn if you choose the right professional training to get involved with can save you a lot of time, trouble, and expense. For example, I get people all the time that have already purchased a handgun and then they come in and take a beginning handgun class. Well, that sort of makes sense, right? I need a gun before I can take a handgun class. But often by the end of the handgun class, they're regretting their purchase decision. They're saying, gosh, if I would only have known that before, I would have bought a different gun, because they truly don't understand what the trade-offs and the ramifications are. So the reason I encourage and I put training first is before you spend a lot of time on this, both in money possibly in buying equipment or time in studying things, actually get some training with some people that can help you make good selections, make good choices in those two topics.
And that's not just your uncle who happens to have a particular gun and he really likes it and says, go ahead and buy this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, again, firearms, the biggest one that we run into all the time is that people they go for a really small gun because they think it will be easier to carry and conceal. And that's absolutely true. It will be easier to carry and conceal. What they don't realize is how much more difficult it's going to be to shoot and how much more difficult it's going to be to develop marksmanship skills with it. They don't know anything about and understand about flinch and how it's a normal reaction. And when you shoot a gun that barks and bites, it's really difficult to concentrate on marksmanship. They don't realize that, this has been known historically for as long as people have been training in firearms. The professionals know, train with a medium to full size gun and then carry a little tiny gun if you have to. But to think that you can learn the skills with a really tiny gun is that's the biggest example of why getting started with professional training can make such a difference for you. And we've hit that topic a couple of times on the gun specific thing. But getting started there can save you just a lot of misspent time and expense. Is get that training. The other one you mentioned, your uncle or whoever, I can't tell you how many times, I've had a comment of, I learned to shoot from my whomever who spent 15, 20 years in the Army. Well, I spent a little over 20 years in the Army, and what I can tell you is less than 5% of the soldiers in the Army ever fire a handgun. Soldiers aren't issued handguns. They don't shoot handguns. Handguns aren't military weapons, with the exception of officers and a few people that are in some support roles that aren't ever expected to ever shoot anything. So, this average person, when I ask them, what did your uncle do in the Army? And if you tell me that your uncle was an infantryman, the likelihood that your uncle ever fired a handgun or was taught to fire a handgun in the Army is about 0. If you tell me that your uncle was in a bunch of technical fields, the same may be true. So bottom line is people don't even realize what the expertise is of the people that they look to for expertise in many cases.
Okay. So obviously taking that beginning type of fundamental class around firearms is important there. What do you think of, with more hand-to-hand self-defense as something to start with for our personal security?
Sure. So what I ask people is, how much time do you want to give this? How much time do you want to expend on this? If you have the interest, so when I studied martial arts, for example, I went a little overboard compared to many people.
I was going to say, I saw the list of your qualifications the other day, and there was a lot of...
Yeah, but, even to go to a typical martial arts class, you're talking about a couple of classes a week of at least a couple hours. And if you're only going a couple times a week, a couple hours, you're talking about a few years to a usable self-defense capability. Why is that? Well, if you come to me, I am a martial arts instructor. If you come to my martial arts program, whether you know it or not, you are on my 3 to 5 year plan. Right? In 3 years to 5 years, you will be a legitimate, qualified black belt, competent black belt. Yeah, there are places that do it in 2, but you can see the difference most times and the quality in those that do it in 2 and those that do it in 3 or 4 years. And that's not 4 hours a week. It's more like a minimum of 6 hours a week. And then when you really get into it and you're approaching your black belt, you're probably talking about 6 months to a year of 10 to 12 or more hours a week. So if you are interested in spending that much time, then there's a whole different criteria of what we're looking for. If you are not interested in becoming a martial artist, which requires you to spend that kind of time on it, then you need to be on a completely different program. If I know that you're only willing to spend a weekend or 2 on this, it doesn't make any sense at all for me to give you the first, let's say, 20 hours of the 5-year plan, because the first 20 hours of the 5-year plan isn't going to pay off for a couple of years. So you need to find systems that are actually based on, designed to be taught in a seminar type of format. People that have thought about, people that are martial arts experts who have now analyzed, distilled, and have this down to the point where I'm going to spend 12 hours or 14 hours or 20 hours with you focusing on material that will absolutely increase your self-defense ability in that amount of time, given that that's the only amount of time we're ever going to have. So that's the first thing, is it's not a martial arts studio for the most part. You've got to get out there to a self-defense type school like Insights Training Center, where people who are experts, who have spent years developing this stuff, have actually focused on, all right, what's the optimal way to increase somebody's self-defense capabilities in 12 hours or 14 hours?
Okay. So definitely look for the seminar style, the self-defense type, if you have the short amount of time that you're willing to commit to it. If you're looking for the long term, obviously you just need to be prepared to commit a significant amount of time to master that skill set.
Right. And those that are looking for martial arts, what I tell people is go look around, get a survey of what's available inside the area that you're willing to commute to on a regular basis, right? I mean, we need to, this is a long-term commitment, so we need to think, well, how far am I willing to commute regularly? So once you get that, then go through, and what I tell people is you need to go visit these places. You need to watch a beginning class. You need to ask them how long they've been there, and anybody that's been there 3 or 4 or 5 years, you say, hey, I'd like to watch one of your advanced classes as well. You want the beginning class to see, do they teach in a way that resonates with you, that fits in with your learning style? You want to watch that advanced class and think to yourself, okay, this is the result of 3 years or 4 years or 5 years of training with these people. Is that where I want to be 3 years from now or 4 years from now? Then you can make an informed decision. You know, it's more about that than it is this style or that style or this system versus that system.
It's finding the one that's going to match best to you.
Yep, and you need to see both how it works at the beginning and what you can aspire to.
Okay, so we've talked about getting the professional training. So now we're on to, and we've hit on it a little bit with the equipment and getting the best equipment, and I know that we've talked about, you know, you go with the training so that you can learn the best equipment. You mentioned that you can afford. So where are we at with that?
Right. You know, we're all under various budgets, and we need to live within our budgets, obviously. We don't need the most expensive of firearms, but we do definitely see, like in our situation, we teach a lot of people. We've been teaching a lot of people for a lot of years now, over 20 years. And somewhere in the neighborhood of around 25,000, 30,000 people that we've trained. We see this equipment. We see guns day in and day out, and we have seen enough to know what's going to hold up and what's not going to hold up. A good quality firearm will last you your whole life and, in fact, be passed down to future generations. Conversely, if you buy a handgun that costs half as much as a typical handgun by a major manufacturer, you're probably going to have problems with it. It is going to break. It is not going to operate reliably. And the last thing you want, this is, how would you feel about a fire extinguisher that you had enough experience that you knew that it works 7 out of the 10 times that you try and put out a fire?
That isn't going to work for me.
Isn't going to work.
Those 3 times that I'm not that fire's not getting put out is not going to work for me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if it's just something we use casually, we can put up with a certain failure rate. But if it's something you only use in a very serious situation, like a fire extinguisher, we're only going to use this if the house is on fire. It really needs to work. Absolutely, positively. That firearm is going to be used only if you or someone you care about is in danger of dying. Yeah, we need 100% reliability at that point. So we're not going to be happy if we've got something that works most of the time. Or at least I'm not going to be happy if we got something that works most of the time. So again, we need to really go with major manufacturers. We need to understand a little bit about what works and what doesn't work, and buy that best equipment that we can afford to buy. Now, that doesn't mean, I don't need the gun with fancy engraving or fancy finishes or that sort of thing.
I was going to say, you don't need to buy, it doesn't have to be a $3,000 handgun. There are some really good handguns that are under $1,000.
Oh, absolutely. That's the vast majority of the guns that we're going to recommend are going to be between $400 and $600.
Yeah, which is fairly reasonable. I mean, it's not the bottom end at $250, $300, but it's something that's going to be able to last you the long term.
Mm-hmm. And more important than how long it lasts is how reliable is it? I mean, even if we do say, look, I don't need to pass this on to future generations, it absolutely has to work now. So good equipment, good ammunition, same thing. Many of you know that I operate a range, an indoor shooting range. We've had so far this year, we have had 3 customers' guns blow up in our range. 2, yeah, exactly. Blow up, as in, be damaged to the point of being non-functional. 2 of the 3 were shooting reloaded ammunition. They had saved a few dollars, a couple dollars a box on ammunition by buying reloaded ammunition. And the reloaders and these are commercial operations, commercial reloaders, had more than likely made some sort of error. You got to shoot an awful lot. If you're saving $2 a box even, and you've just trashed a $500 gun.
To make up that difference.
Yeah, that's a lot of shooting to make up the difference, not to mention the possibility of personal injury and if it should happen, obviously, in a self-defense situation. That's really going to be non-conducive, shall we say. So, and by the way, if those of you unfamiliar with it, no one was seriously hurt in any of those. The way firearms are made, when that does happen, there was one fella had a superficial cut. Actually, I guess 2 had superficial cuts, a little bruising on the hand or forearm. But even when a gun blows up, for the most part, as long as you're wearing proper eye protection, right? The eyes doesn't take much to damage an eye significantly. But as long as you're wearing proper eye protection, the chance of a serious injury is really small, even when a gun blows up. So I mean, that just goes, again, where do you save your money is what we're talking about there.
Okay. No, and that's great. So just to kind of recap where we were at and what we've talked about, we were talking about some tips, and you had 3 main tips for people looking to begin their self-defense or their personal security plans, and we went with professional training, start some form of proper training to start with so that you can get an idea of where you're at, what you need to be doing, and it helps you lead into number 2, which was to buy the proper equipment or the best equipment you can that you can afford, which with the training it leads to a better understanding of what type of equipment fits you best and what your needs are. And then obviously practice and study. You want to always be, not letting that perishable skill perish. You want to continue to practice and continue to do that.
Right. Another one under the professional training is safety. Again, we're talking about shooting not just for enjoyment, but shooting with the idea of increasing our personal security. We're talking about a course of development of skills that include shooting. They're about personal security. If you have a negative discharge or shoot yourself or someone else, that kind of offsets all of the increases you've made in terms of personal security, right? We've not made our life, not only have we not made it better, we've made it significantly worse. So avoiding negative outcomes is a big part of this. And many people go, but of course, but they just don't know the technicalities of it. I use various other equipment as examples, a chainsaw, for example. There's a certain amount of common sense there with a chainsaw. But there's other things that if you don't have experience with a chainsaw and you don't have anybody to tell you with a chainsaw, there's things that the chainsaw will do that you don't know to anticipate. You don't know if you cut a certain way that the saw may be more likely to bounce back in your face or to bind and what the problems are. So getting professional training really helps you understand the safety issues and build in good habits from the very beginning. We see just case after case after case, professional gun shows, NRA, National Convention, various places where I'm looking at videos and I'm watching people pick up a gun and point it at their own hand, pick up a gun and point it at other people. It's just from the very beginning professional training. As far as I'm concerned, universal firearms handling rules, all guns, all times, all places. So, that's another reason to start with that professional training. So we've hit training, we've hit equipment. Third is practice and study. Realize that even if you haven't followed my first two, all of these stand alone and independently. Even if you haven't followed the first two, practice and study. Shooting is a perishable skill. You need to do enough of it to develop a skill level, and then you need to do it enough to maintain it. The idea that you can pick up that gun that's been in the drawer for the last couple of years and utilize it in a self-defense situation, possibly, but you're going to be a lot more comfortable, a lot more confident, and a lot more capable if you at least periodically take that gun out and shoot it, clean it, familiarize yourself with it, put it back together, and put it away. Practice and study. The study aspect, if we're going to get started on this, we need to devote a certain amount of time to learning about how bad guys actually behave and what we can do to increase our abilities there. If you're listening to this radio show, you're already on that track. You're devoting a segment of your life, a period of time, to listen to this information and get some ideas about how you further your study, how you further your knowledge in these areas. And that's something you don't have to do your whole life necessarily. It's like other forms of study. You can spend a concentrated amount of time for a few months or a few years, depending upon how much skill and knowledge you want. You can get a baseline that then serves you well for the rest of your life, just with little touches and tune-ups now and then.
All right, so we are now out of time for this week. Remember to email us at thinkingtactically@gmail.com if you have any questions or things you want to hear about next week. And stop by West Coast Armory North in South Everett or westcoastarmorynorth.com for more information about the show. Until next week,
John Holshan
and Kevin Smith, think tactically and stay safe.
Insights Training Center is locally owned and nationally recognized and offers the most complete self-defense, firearms, and tactical training available to civilians and private organizations, law enforcement, and military. In business for over 20 years, they've taught more than 20,000 private citizens, law enforcement officers, instructors, SWAT teams, corrections personnel, security officers, and military personnel, offering classes from basic self-defense and handgun safety to advanced tactic classes and everything in between. Insights Training Center has a course for you. Their professional instructors come from highly specialized and thorough backgrounds in law enforcement, military special operations, and the private sector. Visit InsightsTraining.com for a complete list of upcoming classes.